Okay. Great. Now with the mental factors, maybe one thing I should let you know. It is usually taught towards the end because it's so not precise. You'll notice as we go along, we haven't really... There are some that are more precise, others less so. The previous explanation, the previous divisions, it's like either it's a sense consciousness or a mental consciousness. This is very clear cut. This is what you call a sense consciousness, this is what you call mental consciousness. This is what you call a wrong consciousness versus a correct consciousness. So here the dividing line, that is the demarcation, is much more obvious, it's much easier to understand. Now we're talking about functions that are very difficult for us to actually recognize. They make sense, but nonetheless it's like, with every mind, they're there. Of course we are not aware so much of the mind that perceives the object, we're much more aware of the object. So hard to recognize that. So these ideas make sense, but we're wondering, do I have those really? Furthermore, with these 5 omnipresent ones, then there are other ones that are in a more intense version of them. So they're just more intense. They could be part of those, but they're not ever present. They're not ever present. They could be those... They kind of function very similar to the 5, but they're in a more intense version of those 5. And they're not always present, so you need to name them slightly differently. So it's hard to distinguish between them. So I hope I can make it as clear as possible. Of course, there was all this confusion this morning, a lot of confusion, and I hope I could clarify that to some degree. And just to kind of add a little bit to it, or just to explain it one more time. We don't just speak of the mind from the point of view of what the mind does, or from the point of view of whether it requires a meaning generality or not, etc. A lot of time is spent to look at the object of the mind, with regard to valid, non-valid. With regard to wrong and correct, we definitely look at the object, does it exist or not, as an example. And then we distinguish between an object from the point of view appearing to the mind and an object from the point of view of being apprehended by the mind. But of course the mind can take to mind more than one object. As in, like, you can take one particular object and then check how it exists. Check its characteristics, or which part it's made of, what function it performs. Now, if we didn't have emptiness and we didn't have dependent arising, we wouldn't have to worry about it, I guess. There wouldn't be that much emphasis on it. But when you take, for instance, emptiness, if you want to understand how the self, for instance, exists, of course there's an existent self. I'm not saying there's no self altogether, but then there's also a self that doesn't exist. That is, we are ascribing the self a quality that it cannot possibly have, cannot possibly possess. And that quality is that of intrinsic, inherent existence. That there's something found from the side of the person that is called the I. Totally independent of us on the deepest level, calling it I. I think that's the hardest, that's the deepest level of dependent arising. Of course, the I is dependent on causes and conditions. It is dependent on its parts, its characteristics. But even further, it depends on someone's labeling I. And so even if we understand that, we still feel, yeah, but calling it I, that's fine, but there's still something there, right? So that's still something there is refuted from a Buddhist point of view. Okay? It's negated. There's nothing there. So it may almost seem you make something out of nothing. It may seem that way, but to understand that that is also not the case means you find the middle way. So you see, this analysis is really important. And as Bauer mentioned modern science, I don't think that analysis takes place to that degree. It moves in that direction, it points in that direction, in particular with quantum physics or quantum mechanics, but I don't think it is expressed in those words. It's expressed, or it is presented in that way. So, therefore you can see the great emphasis on how does the self exist, and how does it exist and how does it not exist? Which characteristic does it not possess? But in order not to fall into the extreme of totally denying the existence of the I, we need to consider also its interdependent existence. And for that, the idea of a focal object and the aspects of that focal object becomes important. In two ways. It becomes important from the point of view of emptiness. It becomes important from the point of view of dependent arising. How does it become important from the point of view of emptiness? Well, as I just said, for instance, if you take the I, and in order to understand its mode of existence, you first need to negate what is extra. Sometimes that is compared to someone telling you a story, and half of what the person tells you is a lie and half of it is true. First you need to find out what is a lie, and then what you're left with, okay, you look at that and you understand which part of it is truthful. So we always start with negating first what is extra. Why do we start with negating? Because our main problem is adding something that's unrealistic. Our main problem is not negating the existence of something that actually does exist. Our problem is adding an existence that has never been there. So it's pretty obvious we need to start with negating. We need to start with negating a certain aspect that we've created in our mind, that has never existed, that our mind has created. Having said so how do you do this? You take a particular object, any object, because our mind creates this unrealistic mode of existence with regard to anything. So taking any particular object, you focus on that. Therefore, focal object, observed object. And now you check, what makes it that object? What makes it that object? In what way? Like, it appears to be so solid over there, as separate from mind and body in the case of a person. And then you just analyze, what is it? Is it its parts? Is the person the parts? Is the person the function it performs? The activities it performs? Is the person its characteristics? Right? Analyze. Anything I can say about the person, what is it? What else would I say about the person? It's made up of parts, the five aggregates. It has therefore certain characteristics and it does certain things, right? So, if I look for the person, that's where I have to look. So my focal object is the person, and now I check, can I find something intrinsic among these aspects? First I understand the aspects, and then I look for them. So in that sense you see focal object versus the aspects of that focal object, which includes its function, its parts, and so forth. So once I've come to understand that it doesn't exist, that there's nothing inherently found, my focal object being the person, I understand its object, its aspect, which is its lack of inherent existence. Does that make sense? I understand its characteristic, which is it not existing inherently. That is the characteristic of the person, of other phenomena too, but since I'm focusing on the person, initially I'll stick with one aspect, with one focal object, and based on analyzing its aspects and analyzing what it would mean if it existed inherently, I come eventually to the conclusion that this focal object, in this case the self, does not exist inherently. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So when I understand emptiness of the person, my focal object is the person, the aspect is its emptiness. Does that make sense? So, the self... Is the microphone not on? It's on? Should I speak closer? Alright. I hope I don't make it too wet. So, alright, so you have the self, and then it's emptiness. The self is the focus, and what you come to understand is the aspect of the self, which is its emptiness. In other words, its lack of inherent existence. Then, in order to understand how the self exists, now I want to know how the self exists. If it doesn't exist inherently, I need to now focus on its interdependence. How do I come to see its interdependence? Well, first of all, it was created by causes and conditions. It has the self itself has the characteristic of being a product of certain causes and conditions. It's one of its characteristics. It has parts that are other than itself. It possesses parts other than itself. It depends on those. And it also depends on a mind labeling it based on the parts, the characteristics, and the functions. Based on those, I label the self as self. Me up against the rain. Alright. So, in that sense, you see the importance of taking the self as my focal object and then looking at the aspects, all the different aspects of that self and checking in what way does it depend on them, first of all, and secondly also understanding that those aspects serve as the basis of imputation based on which I now say self. Okay? Very simply, when I see Bianca, I look at her face. When I say she's here, I'm actually labeling, I have a thought, Bianca is here in the classroom. I'm labeling Bianca. Am I saying it right? Is it Priyanka or Bianca? Bianca. Okay. So Bianca, I know that Bianca is in a classroom, so my mental consciousness labels Bianca based on what I perceive. Right? On the basis of what I perceive her body, her face mainly, and her face, of course, acting in a certain way, so I know she's awake. Performing a certain function, acting in a certain way. Based on that, I then label Bianca. Okay? So my mind perceives Bianca based on the fact that it labels Bianca on the basis of her face. If I look for that Bianca, what I find is her face. That's not Bianca. Okay? When I look for her, I don't find something that is Bianca. Can't find that if I engage in what is called ultimate analysis. Ultimate analysis doesn't just mean analyzing is she permanent, impermanent, and so forth, but analyzing what makes Bianca Bianca. That's called ultimate analysis. So I only find the lack of inherent existence of Bianca, but in terms of how she exists, I also understand she's merely labeled on the basis of certain parts, characteristics, functions. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So hopefully you get a sense how this idea of a focal object versus the aspects of that focal object. So you have a mind, it has an object that may serve as a focal object, and you have a mind whose object may serve as an aspect of that focal object. And you can both take to mind. One is your basis, and the other one is the bits and pieces you try to understand about the object. Okay? All right. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer, and in those 5 similarities, that's what's explained. Saying that if you have a mental consciousness, when you have, for instance, an eye consciousness, or an eye consciousness perceiving the table as green. Okay? Perceives green, a table being green. So the mind can perceive that. Therefore, it's assisted, of course, the main mind can do that because it's assisted by the function of discernment, for instance. Therefore, the main mind whatever cause gave rise to the main mind, the empowering condition that gave rise to the main mind, gave rise to the discernment. Whatever is the focal object of that discernment is the focal object of the main mind, the table. Then whatever is the aspect of the object of the main mind is also the aspect of the object of the discernment, color blue. Whatever at the time when the main mind is there, exists, then of course the discernment exists too. They exist at the same time. They come into existence at the same time, and they go out of existence at the same time, because they're part and parcel. And then lastly, since they're part and parcel, they have one entity, they're inseparably linked, and you only ever have one of each of the mental factors. You can never have two of the same mental factor, and of course only one main mind. Does that make sense? Pardon? Pardon? You can't hear me? Oh. Okay, I try to do that. Alright. Thank you.
So you don't have to strain your back?
Oh, okay.
Great. Everything like this?
Yes. Great. Thank you. Alright, now a little better. So which part did you not hear? The whole thing again? Alright. So, with regard to... Did you understand the focal object and the aspect? You understood the time that they rise simultaneously and go out of existence simultaneously, the mind and the discernment, for instance, as an example. And furthermore, the last one is, they are what is the substantial entity, right? Is the there? Yeah, it's the substantial entity. From the point of view of the substantial entity, they are of one nature, inseparably linked, and you can only ever have one mental factor, one particular. You can only have one feeling, one discernment, one of each of the ever-present or omnipresent mental factors. And only one anger, for instance. Anger is also a mental factor. So at any one time, you only have one of the individual mental factors. Okay? Main mind, one main mind, and then the individual factors. Only, you can't have two feelings. You can't, why would you have two pleasant feelings? It doesn't make sense. There's one function of a pleasant feeling, and there's no pleasant and unpleasant at the same time. It can switch quickly back and forth. You feel good about it, and a moment later you don't. But that's a different type of feeling altogether. So if you're like, I'm not sure how I feel about it, okay, then you're going back and forth. You're alternating between different types of feeling. That at any one time, at any one point in time, you have only one type of feeling, one type of discernment. The other 46 will explain. I don't think you can have 46 at the same time, because some of them are virtuous and some of them are non-virtuous. So you can't have a mind that is virtuous and non-virtuous at the same time. A virtuous mind gives rise to, it creates a positive feeling in the future, a positive experience. A non-virtuous mind creates a negative experience. It's called non-virtuous only from the point of view of the feeling that it gives rise to. Okay? And if it gives rise to a pleasant feeling, we call it virtuous. Does that make sense? Does it? Which part doesn't make sense? What is it? Is it all happening at the same time with these 5 omnipresent factors? Yes. Omnipresent. They happen at the same time. But they may not have the same strength. Right? Like, one is more pronounced than the other. One is stronger than the other. They happen at the same time. They're omnipresent. Well, yeah, you focus on the person, for instance. I know, you can't do it. Yeah.
Now it's worse.
Is it working?
Hello? No. Oh, yes, there it is. So, does it happen at the same time? Yes, it does. And that is a little difficult to really get how it happens at the same time. Thank you, Alex. Because there's a sense of first you make contact, then you do this, then you do that. No, it's happened. The functions are there at the same time, but they're not as pronounced. So you may start off even with a neutral feeling when you initially perceive something, and then it turns into a pleasant feeling. But you always have a feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but is it that you're giving the focal object
and so So the focal object, like when you, for instance, you have the omnipresent factors, and that you take an object such as the person, and you're analyzing its characteristics. So whose characteristics are you analyzing? The person's, not anyone else's. So it becomes the focal object. What else can I say? Your basis is, it's not just some floating parts and floating characteristics. No, they're in particular the characteristics of that person. So that's what you're focusing on, and you're looking at its different, what makes the person. So that's why it becomes your focal object. Why do we stress this so much? Because also, when you realize the emptiness of the person, although the person is your focal object, the person doesn't appear. The person no longer appears, cannot appear, because if the person appeared, it would appear inherently. But now you're perceiving it, and it appears to you as lacking inherent existence. This is just how our mind is so influenced by the perception of inherent existence, that when you for the first time realize an object's lack of inherent existence, the object disappears. It's your focal object, it's still what you focused on, but it doesn't appear to the mind. It is only your focal object because you realize its emptiness. Right? So you cannot separate. The moment you think of a characteristic of something, you must have a focal object, automatically. Because there are no characteristics that are independent on a focal object. But you can just think of I, just generally, without taking into consideration any of the aspects, and then that's different. So in other words, you can take to mind A, or you can take to mind A is B. Does that make sense?
How does it work when it's only A?
Just perceive us.
Without any aspects?
Yes, with your eye consciousness, you perceive just vase. You're not thinking vase is this, vase is, or the mind doesn't think anyway. But the eye consciousness does not perceive vase as being this, that, and the other. Just pure perception of vase.
So then we have only main minds.
No, we have mental factors. We have discernment. We have all this. It differentiates vase from not vase. There's a feeling. All the other aspects, the 5 omnipresent mental factors are always there. Like omnipresent, they must be there. So whether they're fully functioning, how attentive the mind is or not, that's a different matter. But to some degree, they're always there. Does that make sense? All right. No? Too bad. What's the problem?
What you just said about perceiving only vase.
Yes.
I mean, perceiving vase is perceiving its shape, its function, everything else. You can
Yeah, but vase, as in like, perceiving vase means perceiving a shape and color, but you're not aware that this is vase, for instance. You're not aware vase is blue, etc. There's a difference. Just vase versus vase is this, that. There's a slight difference. I cannot explain it. You just need to get used to it after a while. You get used to this idea. There's much more of a direction if you perceive vase is blue versus blue vase. Does that make sense? So this is, unfortunately, we learn that first and it's not explained, and as you go along it will become clearer. There's just not enough time to do so. Okay, sorry. So if you just trust me on that, in the sense that it's more directed. Blue vase, of course, when you perceive vase, you perceive blue vase, if it's vase, right? There's a difference between perceiving vase as blue versus blue vase. Okay, even when I use the words, they appear differently. So even also to the mind, there's a slight difference. Okay, can we leave it now and keep that for the? I didn't want to take too many questions, just to be able to continue, and then all of those raised hands, I'll make a point to answer your questions. Okay, So just to get that general sense, and unfortunately, like I said, this is a crash course. So a lot of the details, I'll try to cover them as much as possible, but I may not be able to do so. Alright, so hopefully it gives you kind of some rough sense, and once your questions are answered, it gets even better, but to give you a sense of mind having at least those 5 functions, which are there to a certain degree. Sometimes weaker, sometimes stronger. Now I still want to ask you, we talked about 5 omnipresent mental factors and 5 aggregates. They're very different. They're very different. The similarity is that they are 5. In the sense that the 5 aggregates, in order to understand the person better, we talk about 5 aggregates. In order to understand a particular mind better, we talk about the 5 mental factors. And then just happen to have 2 mental factors that are parts of both. And I ask you to discuss and to think about, why do you think feeling and discernment are separated out? Like, why, of all the different mental factors? So really, when we talk about who's a person, what makes a person, what makes you, okay? As part of this process of understanding the self, well, we can say there are 2 aggregates, there are 2 parts to you, which is mind and body in general. And then we can also mention another category, different from mind and body, that is very closely related to the mind, which are the imprints. The imprints, right? Okay? The residues left on our mind from particular actions. And then they include feeling and discrimination. Why? What's your view on that? What is the conclusion you came to? Yes? Yes?
I don't know about discrimination, but feeling, what we discussed, I think, in the discussion with this, basically, the feelings are what drives us.
Feelings are what drive us. Okay.
One way it has to behave in a certain way.
Yes.
Like pleasant feelings make us want more of that. Unpleasant feelings makes us move away from it.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yes?
That makes good confidence.
Nice.
But they're active.
They're active?
Yeah, kind of like
I wouldn't say they're active. They're not less or more active than the other. I don't think they're more active. No, I think they're all pretty active. Yeah. Yes?
I thought this is where the wisdom and motivation come from, that you get out of samsara, so feeling is never missed up.
Oh, okay, so feeling and discernment.
The wisdom, discernment, and feeling is where motivation
May be the driving forces that get you out of samsara. I don't know, maybe? Yeah. Could be a reason. I don't know. I've come across an explanation on that, which I don't find really satisfactory on why they singled those 2 out. And I guess your opinion would just complete the explanation that's given there. Do you want it?
In terms of discrimination, so we discussed part of it, we thought that discrimination is there because like feeling can come only after you discriminate, you sort of separate it out and then feeling towards that would come.
Okay, so feeling is that which drives you, and that is the result of discernment. Okay?
Are these the basis for introspection, like distinction and feelings? When you introspect, these are the 2 aspects you try to filter first.
We'll do this during the discussion, during the question answer. I just wanted to have your view on why they're important, so let's leave that as a question. You're the last person on that?
Wouldn't the feeling be the ripening result of individual karma? Isn't that how karma can ripen in pleasant or unpleasant?
That's again a question, right?
No. That would be my answer to this question.
Oh, because it's the ripening of karma, okay. Because it's the ripening of karma, okay. And what about discernment?
Discernment, I didn't really think about that too much.
Okay, all right. So you have discernment and you have feeling. Feeling drives us. Feeling is also the result of past actions. Then you have discernment. It's possibly, like you were saying, also responsible for getting out of samsara. Right? Getting out of samsara and may motivate us. Feeling as well. as well as discernment get us out. I like that answer. Oh gosh, there's more now. Okay. Daisy, maybe you were first.
No, but I don't need to. So maybe someone else.
Okay, Nikita.
I just think feeling and discernment are the basis for any other mental factor, because if you can't discriminate between two objects, there's no focal object as such, or object of engagement, and then post that you have a feeling, and all the rest of the mental factors kind of come under that. In a way, as you have to have a feeling that exists for the rest of them to be experienced.
I would argue without mental engagement, without all the other ones, you also couldn't have. You couldn't have all the other mental factors. You need all those for a focal object, etc. So degree of attentiveness and so forth. So I'm not sure. Maybe you need them further. I don't know, but not sure.
Hatred and love and all these come under feeling?
Not necessarily. Come under feeling. Does it mean under feeling?
Anger is also a feeling.
Oh no, but with every emotion, with every mind, there is a feeling. There is a feeling automatically, no matter what the mind is. But the feeling doesn't necessarily create it. It can, but it doesn't have to. As in, like, yes, a pleasant feeling can give rise to attachment, but of course it doesn't have to. If you can control it, then it doesn't necessarily give rise to that. Yes?
Yeah, just building on his point about samsara. If contact happens and unlabeled feeling immediately follows, then there's a volitional instance at that point, which seems to me why those two are lifted out, because within that ever-perpetuating cycle, there's a sort of volitional kind of moment where there is at least some aspect of free will
Well, free will definitely you could go kind of like check at volition. Yes.
I was giving the example of you put your hand on. It's a crass example, but you put your hand on the stove, and it's a deeply unpleasant feeling. The contact's made, the unpleasant feeling, which you've not labelled yet. And at that point, all kinds of mental things can happen, which determine how you respond and what kind of emotions accrue from that contact, and that's why it feels like that point where you can change samsara, change, I guess, the karmic imprint that's left.
So basically saying it's decisive in the sense, again, of making changes, similar to what he said. It's really feeling and discernment mainly making
when
those
the volitional aspect seems to me to...
But the volitional aspect is always present. But you're saying it sets in more strongly.
You can change its direction, exactly.
All right, thank you. All right. I don't know. I tell you what. Well,
I was just going to say, could it be as simple as that the other aggregates are kind of included in the other descriptions, the different factors and the main ones?
you see, like what I'm saying is, I've come across only one time that it was explained in the text, and none of what you've said referred to that explanation. But the thing is, we don't know 100%, and that is just one reason. So all of those reasons would work, right? I mean, to a degree or another, they all work to some extent. And I think I ask you to share your opinion because it gives everyone else more of a sense why they're separated out, and possibly not always wonder why feeling and discernment. And if I tell you what I read, you'd not be satisfied. So I'm just sharing with you what I read. I think it was Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, in which he says that feeling is the reason why people, just ordinary people, disagree. Discernment is the reason why scholars disagree. Great. Well, you can take it further if you kind of think a little further along those lines, as in looking at our view of reality for people who have less education. I mean, we need to also go back in India at the time, when in India, of course, there were people who had no education, didn't learn how to read and write, and those who were educated. So nowadays you don't have that clear divide between people. But you still have people who are more emotional or more emotionally driven versus those who are more intellectually driven. So a lot of the decisions we make, for some people it's their feelings, feeling pleasure or displeasure, and that governs their action and leads to disagreement. And other people may make more decisions based on their discernment, they're discerning certain things. So from the disagreement, you can take it further to why we act in a certain way, I believe. Okay? But I don't know. I don't think this is so important. Let's not discuss this. This was just a simple kind of homework, if you like, or a discussion group work. If you don't find... I never found the Abhidharma Kosha's explanation that helpful. I never did. I just shared with you. I get that to a certain degree. I like what the two of you said in terms of also... especially getting out of samsara, the two aspects that may drive you more, even though the others are present. But nonetheless, it's just a matter of opinion and doesn't mean that's the case. All right, but allow me to go back to this, and we can do discussion. We can always bring it up. During the question answer, you're welcome to bring it up. That's okay. Okay, great. Yeah. So I know this is, like I said, not that clearly laid out. Minds and mental factors, so not necessarily clear answers. But just focus more on the aspects that you do understand with regard to these 5 basic functions that are ever present. And now we're going into a part of another division of these 5 of the different mental factors, which are 5 object-ascertaining mental factors. Now those are not ever present. They can be present, they don't have to be present. And they are mental awareness, mental functions, they are the functions of a mental consciousness and not of sense consciousnesses. I don't think because, I know, those are all mental to me. I don't think you can have an I consciousness that is aspiration or resolve or concentration or mindfulness. Mindfulness, in fact, is always a mental consciousness. Concentration is too. And here, wisdom, I've used the word wisdom here and intelligence down here. I made a mistake here. I mean, I realize there are a lot of typos and stuff in here. I don't know, I never noticed this before. When I put this together, I didn't pay enough attention. So, in actuality of those 5, the last one, it is the word wisdom, shut up in Tibetan, but shut up. But shut up kind of means discerning wisdom. We have 2 types of wisdom. We talk about discerning wisdom and primordial wisdom. So discerning wisdom is relates a lot more to the kind of intelligence we have on a daily basis. Being able to differentiate, etc. Now you may wonder, how about the discernment, that mental factor? Now just because the mind has that basic function anyway, we can expand on that and take it to a greater level, to a greater degree. With these 5 ascertaining mental factors, you can compare them to the 5 omnipresent mental factors, and you'll come to see that they're very similar, but they're just some of them are very similar to some of the omnipresent ones, but there are more intense versions of them. They're more intense versions of the other ones. So more forceful. Okay? And very important, in particular, you recognize a certain object, you ascertain an object, and you may aspire towards it. That's the first one. Okay? So, with regard to aspiration, I forgot to mention one aspect. I didn't read it. I didn't realize I didn't read one little sentence here as part of intention or volition. That actually... intention is the element of the mind that is mental karma. Intention is that volition, it's sometimes described as intended karma, or karma of intention. No, sorry, it's known as karma of intention. So, or karma of volition, as it's also called, like intention, volition. But this is very difficult to understand. That every mental consciousness creates a karma. When we think of karma, we usually think of virtuous or non-virtuous karma. And even a sense consciousness, there is an activity. The aspect of moving from one object to the next, that in itself is an action. That is an action that we say results in something in the future. But it's neutral. The sense consciousnesses need to just neutral experiences. So karma, the way we usually think of it, is like positive or negative experiences. But even just a neutral act of the sense consciousness, mainly driven by volition, or mainly being defined by volition, that also gives rise to experiences that are neutral. Does that make sense? So, like I said, karma, we shouldn't just think of them as positive and negative. Those are the ones we should be concerned with most. But even neutral ones are also the result. Neutral experiences are also the result of neutral mental activities in the past. And these mental activities lead to physical activities. So even killing, in the sense of like taking the life of a living being, can be neutral. Can be a neutral act. Right? If you just walk on the street and you don't see there's a bug, and you just happen to walk over it, there's no intention to do so. Your intention is just to walk on the street. It's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. In that act, you kill an animal. I mean, it's not even, I wouldn't even say you kill an animal. You take the life of an animal, because killing is described as a non-virtuous action. So if it's really not non-virtuous, you haven't killed in that moment. I mean, even in English you say you murdered and you killed. Murder implies intention to actually take someone's life. To kill doesn't mean, or to have the intention to take someone's life out of hatred. So euthanasia, you may have the wish to kill someone, but it's not out of hatred. You wouldn't say a person who engages in euthanasia has murdered the person. Would you? Wouldn't say that. You kill, right? You kill the person. Or even a surgeon who makes a mistake, right? They kill the person. But actually, I don't think that's real killing. They've taken the life of that person, but they don't have the intention to kill. To kill, you must have the intention to kill. Even if it's to help that person. And that always has some negative aspect. Okay? So the act of euthanasia, there is some non-virtue. But if your motivation is super positive, it's a slight negativity and the rest is positive. So you may have a slight negative experience, which can be purified, which I'm not saying I'm supporting euthanasia. I'm just saying if your motivation is totally pure, you just want to help the other person, your motivation can make a difference. Okay? Or let's take the case of there's a lady, like you yourself, this was on the news some days ago. There was a lady who was pregnant with twins, and she happened to be a doctor delivering babies. And there was another mother who was in distress, also pregnant with twins. And if this lady had not helped the mother with the twins and the mother would have died. But while she was helping this mother in distress, she went into labor. But she had to ignore that. She had to ignore that because there was no other doctor available. She was the only person. This other woman with the 2 children would have died. And that act killed one of her twins. Right? Terrible. But being a doctor, I guess she was aware of the risk. But it was like 3 lives versus 1. And she kind of made that sacrifice. She said she couldn't help it. She was interviewed and she said she couldn't help it because it would have been 3 people. The twin, the mother who had already children, right? And so it was in a very poor country where facilities are not as developed as they are in other countries. So therefore the situation was that extreme. In that case, she didn't kill. I mean, you wouldn't say killed, but her action was responsible, of course, to some degree. But she sacrificed. But for the sake, she engaged in action that avoided worse. Okay? So sometimes there's this decision people have to make between 2 actions. You have to act this way or another way. There's no other choice. one would mean 5 people die, one would mean 1 person dies. What are you going to do? Right? There are these kind of philosophical questions. In that case, you may kill, but the non-virtue is really not the same. Okay, there's the intention possibly to do so. All right. So with killing, it's very, very tricky. But what I'm trying to say is when you don't have any intention to kill, then there's no non-virtue. So you need to have the intention to do so. Having said all this, intention or volition, that is the function of the mind. That is responsible for the mind on a level, not a sense consciousness level, but more on a level of a mental consciousness, where you direct the mind towards virtue or non-virtue. It's that function of the mind that is mainly responsible. You generate a positive motivation, you move the mind towards something positive or something negative. So it's from that point of view that we say karma is accumulated. Of course, karma is accumulated for the whole mind, but that is the main function that is responsible for that. Okay? And therefore, any mental activity, you create a cause for a certain experience with every mind. So what I'm trying to say is with every mind, since there's an omnipresent volition, every mind creates an experience in the future. But like I said, so a feeling in the future. Every mind, due to the volition, gives rise to another feeling in the future. But with the mental consciousness, they're all neutral. So they give rise to neutral feelings. They are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Does that make sense? Okay. But then
mental consciousness, you meant sense consciousness, right?
No, I said with a mental consciousness, then it can be more pronounced, as in like virtues or non-virtues. I'm just trying to say, volition is that aspect. With the sense consciousness, the karma is neutral.
Yeah.
But when you have a mental consciousness, then you can actually transform a neutral mental consciousness into a very positive one, leading to very positive results, and a negative one. And I want to remind you that a volition in and of itself is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. A mind intrinsically is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So sometimes people, before one person asked this question, I'll actually answer these today. One person asked me about the emptiness of the mind. How can you talk about... we've discussed a lot the emptiness of the person. Okay, we could discuss that to a certain degree. And of course, what I tell you here cannot be satisfactory. You need to go more into it. But the mind itself, whatever we say of the mind itself, anything, you take an aspect of the mind. Does the mind exist in and of itself as such? So take, for instance, a virtuous mind. Take, as an example, a virtuous mind. Is the virtue found with this mind? No, you can't find that virtue. Virtue is just a label given from the point of view of the experience it creates. We call it a virtuous mind, but there's nothing in and of itself virtuous as such. It's only labeled. We label virtues. We give the description, or we describe it as virtues. Why? Because in the future, it leads to an experience we like. The mind likes, naturally wishes to take place. Therefore, in dependence on that, we call that positive, because it gives rise to something the mind wishes for. So in relation to that, we say it is virtue. So it's in and of itself neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Is it time for a break? Is it time for a break? What time should we do?
4:30, 4:30, 4:45.
Ah,
We're
so
going
okay.
till 6, right?
That's right, we go to 6. All right.
So maybe 10 more minutes.
Yeah. So the fact that it's a mind, we give it the label mind because it has an object and it does something with it. Right? Something is a mind, again, not in relation to itself, but in relation to its object and its function. We call it a mind. Also, there are moments of minds. In relation on these different moments of perception, we label mind. None of those moments is the whole kind of mind, none of those moments, but still we label mind. So in the same way, we don't really find a mind. When we analyze it, we're always finding something that is not the mind. Its object, its its activity of perceiving its object, its functions. So none of those are the mind itself. So even the mind lacks inherent existence. We just label something mind on the basis of something that is actually not the mind itself. Right? Does that make sense? So in that sense, it's a little harder to understand the emptiness of the mind, but since this was asked, and in the context of here also saying, sometimes people say like, but Buddhism doesn't accept good and bad. Have you heard that comment? Buddhism doesn't accept the existence of good and bad. Of course they accept the existence of good and bad, but only a relative or conventional good or bad, positive, negative. Positive mind, it's positive only in relation to the fact that it gives the mind that which it wishes for. In relation to what the mind naturally wishes for, which is a pleasant feeling, in relation, or mind in general wishes for, therefore in relation to that we call the cause positive. In and of itself it's neither. Does that make sense? Alright. Okay, having said that, now we return to the 5 object-ascertaining mental factors. Having said that volition is karma, okay. Now returning to the 5 object-ascertaining ones. Here you have aspiration, and I said before, they are basically driven by a certain ascertainment of an object. Kind of having you don't always have to ascertain, you don't have to always have an understanding of the object, but in this case you do. So aspiration, to wish for something, to aspire towards something, which is not just this instinctive wish, but is much more, it requires more of an effort, right? I aspire to become a Buddha, for instance. That's the kind of aspiration. But if I have no understanding what it means to be a Buddha, why would I aspire towards it? So some ascertainment needs to be there. Okay? I aspire towards something. I can also aspire towards something negative. So they can be virtues in and of themselves. Those 5 object-ascertaining ones, they're neutral. You asked me that before. They're neutral. They're neither positive nor negative, nor virtues. They can be virtues, they can be non-virtues, depending on what you aspire towards, for instance. Okay? So, aspiration, you aspire towards... I know you're pleased. And I'll give you a source for that later on if you want to know. Yeah. So, therefore, aspiration, you have a certain degree of understanding, which then leads... And they don't define how great is that understanding. It's just saying ascertaining. All right. So, you aspire towards something. You wish to gain something, to attain something, for instance. Does that make sense? Right? The next one is resolve. Not only do you wish for it, now you're interested. Resolve as in like you take it a little further. Okay? You have ascertained the qualities of an object, and now the mind is directed towards the object, but not directed as before with a volition, but much more forcefully directed towards the object, like you resolve to obtaining that. Does that make sense? Right? So first this aspiration is slightly weaker, and then resolve is a stronger version of that. Okay? So our mind, that's mental consciousness. Important for, of course, spiritual practice, aspiring, and resolve. Like, just I want to be a better person. Oh, wouldn't it be nice? I'd like to be a better person. I will be a better person. It's almost like this resolve aspect, right? Seeing the good qualities of that. And then mindfulness. It's a mental factor that does not forget a familiar object. So now you've ascertained an object. You've become familiar. You've ascertained that. And now you try to remain with that object. You stay focused on that object. It's recollection. Like I said, the word mindfulness really means to recollect, like to always go back to it, to remain with this. It needs, mindfulness, like I said, means recollection, means remembrance. You can only be mindful if there's that remembrance. So mindful, what does that really mean in English, mindful? Mindful. What? Right? Full of mind. What does that actually mean to us? In Tibetan, it really means recollection.
Or the mind is full of something.
The mind is full of something. My mind is always full of something. But I don't always have mindfulness.
Something is the thing we are mindful of.
But what does it mean to be mindful of it?
Mindful of aware thing as opposed to mindless, describing you've got too much going on or nothing going on whatsoever.
So focused on the object.
Full of a thing.
Full of one thing, not loads.
I think it's misunderstood in the West. I really think it was misunderstood because it really just means remembrance. Do you really think of mindfulness as remembrance? No. Okay. Well, that's really what it means. It really, in the origin of the word, in Sanskrit as well as in Tibetan, it means to recollect. It's this faculty of the mind that brings the mind always back to the same object.
What is the Sanskrit word?
I don't know the Sanskrit word.
Sanskrit.
That's right. Oh, yes. Yes. And it has the connotation, remembering, yes. Constantly remembering. There you go. So as in like, being mindful means, for instance, like breathing. Your mind gets distracted and you bring it back. Why do you bring it back? It's because of the mindfulness remembering the object. Does that make sense? So you remember the object. You go back to the object. Again and again you go back to the object. In that sense, that's the faculty of the mind. Remembering, that is your object. Going back to the object. So going back to the object is only possible because you remember. There's no contradiction so much in that. But when you talk about mindfulness remaining with the object, you're talking of a slightly different aspect of it, which is fine, right? Like when you remain in the presence. So instead of what we usually do as a habit, thinking of the future and thinking of the past. We're never really in the present moment. We plan the future and we think about what happened before. Does that make sense? So because we're not in the presence, we need to bring our mind back. We need to remember to take it away from the past and take it away from the future. Remember to remain in the moment. That is that function of the mind of remembrance. I think what you described is also present at that moment, and you're absolutely right in that sense. Mindful as in like being attentive to it or focused. But we are not talking about that focus aspect. We're talking more about the ability to go back to the object. All right, so that's mindfulness. And then you need concentration too. Concentration is the mental factor that remains single-pointedly on its object. And mindfulness brings it back. Okay? So being single-pointedly focused, you can only do that if your mindfulness, it's almost like your mind is like a monkey. Right? The mind is like a monkey. So keeping it in one place, there's one person holding the monkey, and there's another person that runs after the monkey when it takes off. So the one that runs after the monkey when it takes off, that's the mindfulness. The one that keeps it in one place, that's concentration. Does that make sense? So we took the children, for instance, and she's not the only one. There's this expression, monkey mind, and she wrote a book on that, the monkey mind. I don't think she came up with the term, but she used that term to then write this very beautiful book. So monkey mind, this mind is like, they also describe, monkey mind I think has to do with the analogy for shamatha. Yeah. When the mind is kind of unruly, goes here and there and is described as a monkey, right? And then you bring it back. So bringing back the mind, that's like a monkey. Here it's like concentration is holding the mind. Mindfulness is bringing it back. Great. And then there's intelligence or wisdom. And this is wrong to say wisdom up there. I should have been more consistent. So kind of discerning wisdom. So it's not just discernment as such. It's more requiring an effort. It's more forceful. So when you're a mental factor that thoroughly discerns the positive and negative qualities of an object. Okay? The advantages, disadvantages, positive, negative qualities. And as I said, these are actually neutral in themselves, but they can be positive or negative. And those are all functions of the mind. They're not ever present, but we can generate them. We all have them. We can develop them. Aspiration is not just a wishing mind, but it's stronger than that. So the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Bodhicitta, the definition of bodhicitta is the aspiration, right? A main mind that is associated or concomitant with the mental factor of aspiration that wishes to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So you have all these words in there, aspirations, the same spelling in Tibetan, same word. So I use the word aspiration as well here in this context. Does that make sense? Break?
aspiration very well.
No, Dumba. How does you do not Dumba. Jewa means hope. Yeah. All right. Should we take a break? It's 4:33, so 15 minutes break. And again, you're welcome to come forward. Great. All right. Oops. All right. So hopefully those are kind of clear. A little bit. Great. Then we have the 11 virtuous factors. If we go to 6, we should start question answer around 5:30, right? That makes sense. Yes. Maybe should we have a little bit, add 10 minutes?
You said you were going to add 10 minutes.
I said that, right? But I also want to make sure that everyone is okay with that. 40 minutes of question and answer, keeping it to the mind if possible. Would that work?
I'm seeing a few people now saying no.
No? Who wants it? Who wants 40 minutes?
If it's going to be on top.
Who wants 30 minutes?
30 minutes.
Good. 30
Is
minutes.
there an option for 20?
29? All right. Okay, good. Then let me go back to 30 minutes. Now, so far the mental factors have been neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. They can be virtuous or non-virtuous. So you can use those 5 ascertaining ones to rob a bank. Right? The aspiration to get all that money, the resolve to get all that money, being very mindful. Look at these bank robbers. The better the bank robbery, the more planned, the better it's planned. Right? It means a lot of mindfulness, a lot of planning, and then a lot of mindfulness, focus, right? When you go in there, make sure the doors are locked, etc. No one presses the wrong button and all that, right? I watch some movies. Know how it works. So basically, right, aspiration, resolve, mindfulness, concentration, and intelligence, right? Is usually the clever one who plans the whole thing and the other one who messes it up. Okay, great. So virtuous, non-virtuous, it can be neutral, of course, too. Yeah. Okay. I forgot to let you know. I didn't know the source for your argument with your friend. Okay. The 11 virtuous mental factors. Now you have particularly virtuous ones that are positive ones. And again, faith. If you say, what about faith in something negative? Then it's just not called faith. Here, faith is that virtuous aspect. So of course we're running out of words. So and there are only that many words to describe the mental function. So the 11 virtuous mental factors are, one of them is faith. Shame. We don't like the word shame. Integrity. That's another, integrity. Maybe that's a better word. It's literally, in Tibetan, it's shame, right? What can I say? But we don't like shame. But that's just a cultural thing. In the past, it wasn't the same thing, right? It's so interesting. Okay, talking about the lack of inherent existence of words. That needs to be introduced, right? It needs to be introduced. We are not aware of the lack of inherent existence of words. Therefore, we need to change words all the time. Okay? So in the past, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. It comes out of real concern for others, and so the motivation is nice. But in the past, the person who had a mental problem was called insane. And then this person was called crazy. And then mentally challenged. Now it's mentally impaired. So we need to change the word all the time, because it seems that now the word has taken on a negative connotation. I usually say this jokingly, but because of our obsession with youth, there are no longer any old people. They're all elderly. You're 90, you're elderly, right? It's almost like whitewashing the fact that, old anyway is relative. A 2-year-old is old in relation to a 1-year-old one, right? It's of course relative, but in everyday life, we don't call a 90-year-old person young. So, but since it seems to be something negative to be old in our society, then we use the word elderly as if there was something in the word, which is fine, but, you see, there's a huge cultural difference, because we say words can do no harm, but sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can do no harm, right? There's that saying, because it doesn't feel that way. So we need to remind ourselves, oh, come on, it's just a word. But a lot of the hurt we experience is because there's a sense, there's something intrinsic in that word. So when we talk about lack of inherent existence, we shouldn't just think of the eye and tables and even the mind, but also words themselves. There's nothing within that word that makes it this, that, and the other. And usually I tell you this joke. There's a funny story behind this, which kind of brought this home to me, this whole idea. So I apologize to those who heard hear this joke many times. When I was in Israel one day, and I was in the restaurant with a friend of mine, and I wasn't very hungry, and she wasn't hungry, and we went through the menu, and I wasn't really paying attention, and I had this, I don't know where it came from, I was looking through it, and it says shakshuka. And it's the name of a dish. And I said, wow, if I had a daughter, I'd call her shakshuka. Now Israelis think it's hilarious. I made the same joke at Tibet House. I taught at Tibet House one day, and I didn't say shakshuka. I said, if you translate it into samosa, for instance, I call my daughter samosa or something, right? And all the Indians go, ho, ho, because it's just a very popular dish, right? Anyway, so shakshuka to me just sounded like a pretty name for a girl. Shakshuka, it's actually a tomato egg dish. I don't even like it much. After that event, I've had to eat so much shakshuka, and I don't really like it. But the point is, you see, for me, that word just meant, it was beautiful, it sounded nice. It sounded to me like Shoshana, which is also, it's right? Shoshana is a Hebrew name, isn't that? It means rose, but it's old-fashioned, isn't it? So then I told people, it reminds me of the name Shoshana, and they're like, oh, that's so old-fashioned. And I thought, oh my God, to me it's not old-fashioned, it just sounds pretty. So then I realized it seems to be even something old-fashioned in a name. Like Edward, that's old-fashioned, right? Edward? Oswald, oh that's right. Oswald, right? Oswald. Who calls their son Oswald? Right? And what is it in India? It's Paramita? Is that an old-fashioned name? Paramita or something? No? I forget now. Like a real old-fashioned name. Never mind. Pardon? So you see, there seems to be something intrinsic in those names, like ugly, like my grandmother's name. I would never think a young girl being given the name of my grandmother, because that's, to me, intrinsically old-fashioned. But where my confusion comes in is when one of my sisters called her daughter Matilda. And I was like, poor girl. Oh my God, she's a young girl. Now Matilda has changed. Now I think of it like a young girl, because there are other girls called Matilda or Emily. It's like, Emily, ugh, who would call... Now I think it's beautiful. Oh my God, your name is Emily. It was in the past.
I don't go by Emily either, sorry.
No, I think it's a cute name, because now I think of little girls called Emily, but in the past it was like, like old people. Oh my God. It's like, it was just... Our sense of names, it's really interesting. So I discovered this, it was almost like discovery is the wrong word, but as if there was something intrinsic in the word. There's something from the side of the word that makes it a food, or it makes it a certain dish, or it makes it old-fashioned, or it makes it whatever. There's nothing from the side of the word. And what's so interesting, the Tibetans have a very strong sense of that. And they gave each other's name, like my classmate, they gave each other names that were not very complimentary. And it was a great practice. You don't want to know what my name is?
I know.
You know my name? What is it?
Monkey bum.
Monkey bum. Monkey bum. Because when I was like... you remember I told you the story. Biukup. Biu means monkey, kup means behind. Biukup. Because my face used to be even redder than it's now. So, because like the monkeys around here, they have a red behind, right? So my classmates called me Biukup. Monkey bum. And we had one classmate, his name was Acne. You know why? And we had a cook, he was called Fatty. We still call him Fatty. Machin Gakpa, fat cook. It's not the nice version of fat, like strong or heavy. No, it's fat. Machin Gakpa. So the Tibetans, it's kind of part of their culture now that you can using these words, and it was almost like, and the thing was, it was so funny. I learned this from my Western classmate who happened to be a man, and he was much closer to my classmates. And when I don't remember what his nickname was, but he was like, no, I don't want to be called that. They called it even more. So then I figured that one out. I was lucky. I learned from his mistake. And then next time they were like, what's your name? And I was like, Monkey Bum. And they stopped calling me that because now it was boring to call me that. So they only called me that for a year or so until I started introducing myself as Monkey Bum. There. There's the bum. All right. So you see, it was almost like a practice for us to also be called these names and to get used to it and to realize it's just a name. There's nothing in and of itself. If someone calls me stupid, and here, okay, monkey bum, all right, I don't know what's worse, stupid or monkey bum, but the point is, it's just a word. It doesn't make me stupid. And if I'm already stupid, well, thank you for letting me know. Maybe I didn't recognize it. And if I do know, it's like, okay, I know. Right? I mean, stupid is not a good word because, of course, stupid means I cannot do certain things. But, of course, there's no one who's really... I mean, I can be stupid. I am stupid when it comes to parking in a car backwards. I cannot even park it in forward. When I'm in Germany, I do drive a car. But parking in after like a year in India is so difficult. Even forward. Like every time there's like a huge gap. I cannot get out on the other person can't get out because I can't get in the middle. So I don't even attempt backwards. I never try that. But even forward is such a challenge. I literally have my mom drive to just get into the parking spot, right? So I'm really stupid when it comes to parking. I fit that stereotype both directions, forward and backwards. So anyway, my point is, I'm really stupid when it comes to that, right? But then I'm not so stupid when it comes to cleaning my room. I can kind of do that, right? So there are other things I can do. So, of course, it's relative. And to understand the word stupid is just in relation to maybe an inability. So why would I be so hurt if someone calls me that? Okay? To really check, it's just a word. If the other person's intentions are negative, that's their problem. If they have an intention to harm me, that comes out of resentment and anger, and understand that's wrong. They harm themselves. So really, if I haven't done anything, then it's definitely my problem. If I have done something, well, thank you for pointing it out. I'll try to change. I've made a mistake. So a lot of the hurt that we experience because of what people say, if you get a better sense of nothing inherent in words, and anyway, what does a word really convey? It doesn't convey the whole person anyway. We can avoid a lot of hurt. To me, that's really, really important because in the West, we're so careful about being politically correct with what we say. Now, I like being careful because that means you're considerate, you're kind, you're mindful, etc. But if you start expecting that kind of correctness, then you become just super sensitive. We're too sensitive to some of the words. So it's so easy to hurt us. The Tibetans, it's very hard sometimes to hurt them with words because they have this sense, it's just a word. You're calling me an a-hole or whatever, something horrible. Well, that's not my problem. Sorry, or a jerk, right? I didn't use the whole word, right? The ... was in there, right? So whatever actually, how is that a problem, really? How does that hurt my feeling? It's also like as if there was some solid hurt my feeling. Which feeling? What feeling was hurt? Okay, you could say my pleasant feeling. Well, yeah, just because I chose to be upset with it. If I feel really happy, right? And someone says, you're a jerk. Well, if I'm not a jerk, and the other person is just angry, it doesn't make me a jerk, right? And like I said, if I am one, then okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll try and change. You see, we never analyze these words. We never analyze exactly what's going on. And it leads to so much hurt. And of course, I'm not saying we should encourage another person to abuse us. But that's different to the whole thing of feeling upset and feeling... And then it's like so interesting. There's a sense, they hurt my feeling. And that word starts to become like a dark cloud we carry with us. Right? It kind of like, it hovers. There's like, sometimes you forget, oh, why was I upset? Oh, they called me a particular hole. So, they called me a jerk. Sorry, I shouldn't use that. So, they called me a jerk, right? They called me... My classmates would use that word, like shit and a-hole. Like, it was just all the time. They had no sense of how negative it was, right? Like, shit, like all the time. It's like actually quite bad to use that. But they didn't have the same sense for it. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that even when these words, when we call that, there's a sense it's hovering above me. We create this whole reality out of just a word. And that's just created by the mind. There's a lot of suffering that goes along with that. A lot of people are depressed. People carry certain insults with them their entire life. It influences them. And if we understand a little bit more about the nature of the other person speaking those words, different awarenesses working together, there's no intrinsic evil person. Right? There's no intrinsic bad person. There's just different awarenesses that due to the circumstances arise in that moment. And the person are actually just like us, they just want to be happy, but don't really know how to find that happiness. And then they use a word. It's just a word. Shakshuka. Right? Whatever. Monkey bum. It's just a word, right? I mean, it's a monkey bum, so what? It's helpful, it's useful, kind of, without it'd be difficult. So the point is, therefore, it's like, it's not really in and of itself negative. My point is saying, like, it's not in and of itself. And if the intention of the other person is negative, how does that harm me? How does that harm me? Never mind. So how does that harm me? I just picked up the smell from the kitchen. So how does that harm me, basically? My attachment is... So you see... Really analyze, really investigate, okay? And a lot of hurt we can avoid. That's all I'm trying to say. So we don't have much time to go into all these details on that. We may have time if you have questions to discuss it further. But that's also part of the lack of inherent existence of words. To be also aware of that. It's not stressed much, but it's equally important. All right.
If you want to fly cheap, fly at September 11th, for example, it's a date that nobody would like to fly with that. So
seriously?
Flights are very
what is the likelihood this happens again on September 11th? It's probably the safest day. Because statistically, it's probably not going to... No, I'm kidding. But okay, there you go. Or number 13. Oh, yeah. And there's never a row in a plane. Now I know there's no hotel room. I knew that before. But now I realized the other day I was booking my flight and I was looking at the rows and I was like, there's no row 13? I don't care to sit in row 13. But there's something intrinsic in that number, right? And then they say there's statistically people have more accidents on Friday the 13th, but they say it has to do with our preconception. We're more scared, we're more insecure, and there's more likely something to happen. So it's just created by the mind. A lot of suffering. I don't care there's no row 13 in a plane. I mean, if I sit in row 14, I'm actually sitting in row 13. So what's the big deal? It's just not called that, but it is row, right? It's like hypnotizing someone and saying there's no 8, and you end up being 11, but in actuality you just left out 8. So really, like, who are you fooling? Anyway, so my point is that we give an inherentness, like something within the objects, and we suffer, we experience fear, we experience superstition, etc. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right? So unnecessary one. That, of course, obstructs us. Alright, but going back to... So, that's why shame. Oh, that's why I started this whole thing. Come on, shame. It's when you know what it refers to, integrity, yes, maybe it's really a better idea. I like what M suggested, and I've seen other translations of that. But maybe it's a good time to also go like, come on, it's just a word after all, right? And what it refers to, of course, is also important. So, faith, number 1, is a mental factor that serves as the antidote of non-faith, and is one of the 3 types. But I just literally wrote it. I just translated it. Sorry. I mean, kind of makes sense. But it was one of the 3 types. All right. So faith of conviction. Sorry. So faith of conviction, admiring faith, or aspiration of faith. You remember we talked about those 3? So faith of believing faith, or faith of conviction. It's sometimes described as believing faith, faith of conviction. Then there is admiring faith. So faith isn't like, I believe this to be the case. I have faith that there is, for instance, emptiness. Okay? But I'm not sure. I have no incontrovertible knowledge of that, right? And then admiring faith, or like joyful faith. That's the word I prefer. I use admiring because that's also used, right? Sometimes, and I don't know why I did that. Actually. No excuse. Actually, it should be joyful faith. So joyful faith, as in like you admire someone, and out of that you were inspired by someone. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I always like to take him as an example, because people experience a great degree of joy just being in his presence. Okay, and there are other people. Maybe like Nelson Mandela, it's probably really joyful when he was alive to be in his presence, just to be inspired by his character, his personality. And then aspiration of faith. That's the last type, where you wish to attain something. Again, of course, based on aspiration. But faith is something slightly different. It's a little, it has a virtuous aspect to it, right? You aspire to something, towards something virtuous, something positive. And usually there's even like a progressiveness in the sense you start with believing faith, right? You start with believing and hearing something about maybe the Dharma, for instance, and then you meet someone who lives the Dharma, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then you aspire towards the same, to become like that. So you see there's like a way in which one leads to the next. Okay, so that's called faith. Faith, as I said, is very important. It's supposedly it has these 2 characteristics that I described. It's based on reasoning, and it's supposed to be temporary, right? Based on reasoning and temporary. Until, once you realize the object, there's no more conviction or belief, because you know. And then joy, when you achieve this state yourself, you have joy all the time. You don't need to be in the presence of a great master to experience that degree of joy. It's just ever present. The degree of deep satisfaction, contentment, and joy. You know what they say about His Holiness the Dalai Lama? He brings forth a joy that's almost like how can I call that? Like a coming home joy. Like they say, like it triggers a joy within you. That's the deepest sense of joy. It's a kind of spiritual joy. It's not just the joy because you got a new pair of jeans kind of joy. No, it's much more. It's like a lasting, deep sense of satisfaction. Okay, so that is what we're aiming for. And they say sometimes the presence of the Lama can trigger an emotion in us that gets us curious, that may aspire then towards reaching that same state. All right? Okay, so that's faith. Shame. All right. Now, shame is a mental factor that refrains from non-virtuous actions out of reasons concerning oneself, out of self-respect, for instance. Right? So, why is shame so negative? What is it? Let us check just quickly. Why is shame so negative in the West?
Because it was associated with neurosis.
Like a neurosis?
Yeah, associated with mental sickness.
Oh, okay.
I think it's associated.
Right, you associate it with mental sickness?
The ego is hurt.
Okay.
People are afraid of vulnerability.
Yeah, Renee Brown.
What?
Afraid of vulnerability.
Yeah, there's a speaker who did a bunch of TEDx talks, and she spoke on how shame is like the opponent to vulnerability, which creates loneliness and isolation and
shame.
Yeah.
I mean, I can be ashamed. I made a mistake. I'm ashamed of myself. But that could just lead a more... I'm talking more about that. Oh, I'm kind of ashamed I did that. That wasn't right. I feel ashamed of myself. But it just lasts for a moment and I move on. Is there something wrong with that? Just with that?
That's not shame. Shame is the Hindi word is sharam. Sharam.
It's also a word. our need to look good in front of people,
exactly.
and that sort of tarnish.
They shamed me. They made me feel ashamed.
It has a negative connotation.
Yeah, your self-image.
I see. It has to do with healthy self-confidence versus shame. Why do I need to feel ashamed? It's almost like something that goes against my...
Yeah, I understand shame to be when you are no longer able to say that I am this, like I have this position. So if I'm a mother and I do something that's not good for a mother to do, I feel ashamed because I can no longer say that I'm a good mother.
So the connotation of wrong is also there.
Because I no longer have that
So like in India, it's like most of your parents turn around and tell you, oh, it's so shameful that you're wearing such a short skirt.
Because your family isn't worthy of that.
It's unworthy, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you reduce the respect or the goodness or whatever that position looks
You're
like
less
for
worth.
a good family. Because I don't agree with that. That's implication. Yeah.
Okay, now I get it. To me, it was just the Tibetan word, and I just thought, like, whoops, I don't.
It's like not worthy.
Yes, please.
It's also having no shame.
Having no shame. Having no shame. But that again is something negative. So how can having no shame is negative and having shame is negative? Oh. Right? Well, I'm thinking of shame as just the opposite of having no shame. That's how I look at it. Right? But I guess
having no shame is when you're doing something shameful.
What? Having no anger is like doing something angrily?
That's the connotation of you have no shame means.
No, I think having no shame means you don't care about anyone. You just go ahead and do it, right?
So you're doing something which is shameful.
Having no shame.
You're doing something that creates shame. So it's shameful. Who of shame?
So no shame is having shame.
Yeah. So no shame is doing something that would ordinarily be considered shameful, but not responding in a way that
it doesn't have an inherent meaning.
I agree with you, but I want to understand the inherent meaning that we perceive it to have. Right? I agree with you, but we see it. Okay, it's good. No, it's good for me to get a sense of why it is negative, and of course I won't use it then, because I have to be careful, of course. Right? So, shameless. Having no shame. Okay.
Yeah, if you do something that is ordinarily considered shameful, but you don't respond in the socially acceptable way, which is with shame,
yes,
then you disregard the social generic agreement things, and that is a negative. Right?
All right.
It goes
Okay,
against
great.
the society.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, I'll think about it longer. I think I get a better sense. Yes, please.
Considerate of others.
Yeah.
Consider what?
Considerate of others.
Inconsiderate. Oh, so you use the word integrity, right?
Oh, you went ahead of me.
I didn't hear that. Never mind. So, all right, integrity. How about the word integrity? Right? So, a mental factor that refrains from non-virtuous actions out of reasons concerning ourselves. A sense of integrity. So no one knows I stole, I don't know, that piece of chocolate, but I still do it. I won't do it. Right? No one would know if I secretly kind of, take something. So it's not because others would accuse me of like, oh, you've been so greedy. But I don't do it anyway, because no one knows. So I'm the only one who knows. But out of a sense of integrity, I therefore don't do it. That's probably a better word. So integrity, please cross out shame then. So integrity is a mental factor that refrains from non-virtuous actions out of reasons concerning oneself. Out of self-respect, for instance.
Not including karma.
Pardon?
So, for example, I was thinking
And karma. And karma.
chocolate thing.
Yes.
Even if nobody saw me, that would still be the karma. So,
Yeah.
are we also...
Also including that, because that's just my karma, right? So you may just avoid a negative action. Of course, the self-respect is a little nicer. That's a better reason for it. But even karma, that's all right. Okay? And just in case you wonder, well, why is all this altruistic doing this and that? And then you have like this reward system of karma. That's just initially. When we start off, we can't help it. We want to get something out of being a good person. And if someone promises you, well, if you're a loving person, you have all these positive results, well, then we do it. And at some point our love is so strong that we don't care what our karmic result is. We just do it because it's right. So don't be confused about this idea of karma being initially mentioned so much. That's just to give in our natural sense, like I cannot do something unconditionally, at least I need to get something back. And eventually, the more you progress, the less that becomes an issue. Who cares, good karma or not, is the right thing to do. So here, self-respect is a little bit like a better reason than having positive karma or accumulating positive karma. Can you wait for the question?
No, I just want to know, could you use the word conscience?
Conscience.
Like,
conscientious.
Yeah.
Oh, that word is also used. That's right, conscientiousness. Some people use... Pardon? Forbearance?
Another factor.
Yeah.
Conscientiousness. Oh, conscientiousness already taken. Sorry. Yeah, so maybe let's keep the integrity. But once we get to conscientiousness, then see whether maybe another word. Okay, we can still fool around with it. Because these words are not words that are used that often. Like I said, mind and mental factors are not discussed that much. We don't even debate it because it's so hard to really define one over the other. It just gives us more of a sense how the mind works.
I was just thinking about the word root instead of shame. That's what we would say in Holland.
What is the word in
roots? In English, roots. Your roots.
Your roots. Your root, R-U-D-E?
Yeah. But that's completely different.
But being rude is like not something positive. This is virtues. Right? Like integrity, as in like you avoid doing something negative because of reasons concerning yourself. Anyway, after all this, I'm sure we all understand what this one refers to. Alright. Consideration. That is a mental factor that refrains from non-virtuous actions out of consideration for others. It doesn't necessarily mean compassion. It can become a cause for compassion. But just kind of out of reasons that concern others. First it was concerning myself. Now it's concerning reasons others. Like, well, they also want some chocolate, right? So it's not just self-respect, but also, Tim, what is it?
I'm just it's funny, hilarious that shame's a positive quality.
No, what I'm saying, like in Tibetan, there's the word shame. I mean, they translate it as shame usually, right? I feel ashamed of myself. The way I say, oh, I'm embarrassed, or I feel ashamed of what I just did. So they use it in a very innocent way, and since that is the word, I used to. But it was my mistake. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this. The worst thing that could happen in Holland, if you fart accidentally, for example here, this feeling,
I'm ashamed.
Live with it.
Yeah, you're like, oh, really embarrassing.
No, it's embarrassing.
Embarrassed. Okay, all right.
I think we need to make a distinction.
Okay, embarrassment versus shame. Okay, great. I get it. My mistake. So forget about the shame. It's really integrity. Wait, don't say, Tim, that they do that. I did that. There was no they, there was just me using it. And sometimes I'm also a little bit, because of that, I'm thinking, come on, let's get over it. It's not what is so negative. It has positive aspects. But you've totally convinced me that this is negative. So I let it go.
Shame with respect to oneself, it's not to be shared with others. As opposed to embarrassment, where everybody's saying it's shameful. It's like as if someone's accusing you. No, you do something and no one else knows about it, and you feel.
Meenakshi's making a good point. We're not talking about putting on a short skirt or anything because of what others think. I don't care what others think. Just my own self-respect in that sense.
And it prevents you from doing bad action.
Prevents you from,
Yeah, but it's more
but integrity is still right. I mean, just to avoid that, I think Meenakshi made a very clever point here. I didn't consider that, but I still think integrity, just to avoid any misunderstanding, but still to consider what she said. That's important. I would say, okay, non-attachment. Very difficult. What is that? Honestly, I struggle with that. Non-attachment is a mental factor that is the opponent of the mental factor of attachment. Detachment. It's kind of like a detachment. Just letting go of the attachment, right? But it is a function the mind can perform because that leads you to renunciation, for instance. So it's like the opposite drive. To me, it's kind of like letting go. Letting go in the sense of that function of no longer attaching to something, but that kind of moving away from it. And you can still love someone without having attachment. But it's really funny. Some people, they don't like to be loved in that way, right? When the other person is not jealous, they're like, we almost expect a certain degree of attachment, right? Yeah, but honestly, it does lead to a lot of messy aspects. And if it's to a certain degree, that's nice. But how do we control that? I mean, if it becomes too overwhelming, you see, certain states of mind, they're not such a big issue in everyday life. They keep us from being liberated, but we may not necessarily be so concerned about it. And that's correct. That's okay. We should deal first with the more obsessive aspects of them. But be careful that they can become obsessive. Right? So total detachment, like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have total detachment, but then of course incredible love. So for us, those two seem to be contradictory right now, but to also understand what that actually means. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. And then non-hatred. Again, non-hatred is a mental factor that's the opponent to the mental factor of anger. It's like to let go, basically, of your sense of hatred, resentment, etc. Okay. Non-ignorance. What is that? It's a mental factor that's the opponent to the mental factor of ignorance, right? It's again letting go of these wrong views. Ignorance is of two types. Or it can be of more type, but depending on how you look at it, Thomas often talks about it. Ignorance as in merely not knowing, and ignorance that is diametrically opposed to how things really exist, as in like grasping at phenomena to have a nature that is the opposite of how they really exist. So for instance, if I don't know the alphabet, if I don't know A, B, C and so forth, don't know my ABC, so then in that case it's an ignorance that is with regard to not knowing something. That is actually not a problem. It's not the kind of ignorance we're worried about here. Just not knowing something, you can learn about it. And of course it'd be better if I knew it. It would make my life easier with regard to certain things. Certain things is not important to know. But and also when we sometimes have the opposite views of something, that's also not necessarily a problem, but it becomes a problem when it concerns ultimate nature, reality, permanence, what is really in the nature of happiness versus what is in the nature of potentially can give rise to suffering. Those misperceptions, they're important, right? What is in the nature of happiness? Or when am I misperceiving something in the nature of giving me lasting happiness when actually it cannot do that? That would be an opposite, being diametrically opposed to what things are really like. Does that make sense?
Is it different from wisdom?
It's different from... Oh, yeah. Non-ignorance is different from wisdom. It's just kind of letting go. It's that function of the mind that lets go of a wrong view, right? I guess it's kind of like that aspect of like... the opponent force is, of course, wisdom. Wisdom can make it possible to let go of that view, but it's just that aspect, I guess, of letting go. I don't know. It's not explained. There's no explanation, but that would make sense to me. In the same way as letting go of attachment, letting go of hatred, letting go of this wrong view. Okay. Diligence. Okay, diligence is a mental factor that delights in engaging in virtuous actions. Okay, so diligence, perseverance, joyous effort. Those are different translations for the same word. Joyous effort is really the definition of diligence. Diligence has a different connotation than perseverance. Diligence is more like the initial, what do you call that? That initial drive. What did I just use? Perseverance. Perseverance is like after that initial drive, you continue on. And it's always virtuous. I'm not talking about perseverance when it comes to robbing a bank. I mean, here it's just virtuous, right? The word can be used in everyday life differently. It is in Tibetan. In Tibetan there's a word for virtuous kind of diligence. But some other words don't necessarily always mean virtue, but in the Buddhist context here they do. So in this case here, diligence is working hard, but having joy in doing so, not forcing yourself. Diligence doesn't mean you force yourself. It means you want to do, you understood why, and you experience joy in doing so. That is, again, like I said before, if you want to practice Buddhism, if you don't find some place of joy, you don't find some kind of satisfaction, some joy in an action, which doesn't mean things cannot... It's not the case that there are no hardships involved. Of course there are. But you're able to override them, as in like accept them, and still feel joy just in the act of having done so. So this is similar to exercising, right? If you're, of course, the effort of exercising is difficult. You may experience pain. You may experience the difficulty of actually just starting to exercise. But then once you've done it, you feel good about it. So that is the kind of joyous effort in the case of just something neutral that allows you to continue. So here it's, of course, joy in a virtuous activity. Very important.
You say joyous effort. I also heard that to describe enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm, that's right. Yes, enthusiasm. It's actually described as enthusiastic effort. Because there's still this aspect of working hard, but in combination with enthusiasm. It's like being delighted. Okay, great. So, question, yes, it's question answer time. 47. Yeah, we finished. I'm pretty sure we finished. Does that make sense? We finished? 2 days? Can you finish that? Yeah, we finished, right? We have 2 days, 2.5 days. Yeah. Okay, great. Right, first question. Well, there was Tuval, Tim, Bao. Was it Bao? I'm not sure. But definitely Tuval. And Sam.
But I asked you already.
Ah, you asked me. Okay, great. All right. Who else was there? Anyone? Okay. You were two? Oh, you were two. Okay. All right. You can still ask, of course. Tim, you still have a question?
Just two very quick clarifications.
Okay, clarifications, yes.
Well, one was, so these 49 mental factors...
51 or 49?
Sorry, 51. I mean, and the main minds and the mental factors. Mm-hmm. So it's just a broad question about the schema. So can any mental factors... Can you say anything broad about the way any of the mental factors can be subsets or of the main minds? Is there anything? Can any belong to any? Or are most of them mental consciousnesses? Or
well, I mean, like for instance, the virtuous ones, the 11 virtuous ones, they're always positive. They're always virtuous. And they're always mental consciousnesses. Okay. Right. So the omnipresent ones can be any of them.
Right.
But then all the remaining ones, I mean, pretty much most of the remaining ones are mental consciousnesses. So they're less. So you can tell, therefore, the mental consciousness has a lot more functions. Like the conceptual mind, although it is limited in one way, it can perform a lot more functions. And of course, some of those functions are contradictory. So the question is, how many of those can you have within one mind? But I cannot tell you right away, and have to go through it.
Fine. And the other quick clarification was with feeling. You might have addressed this earlier on, but is it impossible to have two or more separate feelings simultaneously?
Well, yeah. If you have a body consciousness experiencing continuous pain, but an eye consciousness perceiving your favorite food, right? So we talked about it like cognizing. The pain can continue on, but it becomes an awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. So the mind no longer cognizes, but it's still present.
So if I've got a pain in my shoulder and a pain in my knee,
yes.
Can I apprehend both of those simultaneously, or will I flip between the two?
Well, as in like real... Oh, okay. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
it was just... if I've got a pain in my knee and a pain in my arm, do I apprehend those through my sense consciousness simultaneously or not?
Or not? Do you experience those simultaneously in your knee and your arm? Well, the thing is... in your shoulder or in your arm or in your leg. Anyway, so the point is here, there's a difference between perceiving the pain or experiencing the pain. your body consciousness experiences pain in your like a pleasant feeling and an unpleasant feeling, but in different places. I don't think that happens simultaneously, because the body consciousness focuses on one sensation at a time, right? So it would shift back and forth, and then to identify it as pain and so forth, that's then the mental consciousness, and again that wouldn't happen simultaneously. But you could, with your eye consciousness, see something. The pain is continuously there, right? So, like the body consciousness is constantly aware of this particular pain because it's very pronounced. And at the same time, with your eye consciousness, you experience a nice object. So there's a pleasant feeling in both cases. There's a pleasant feeling with regard to your eye consciousness and a negative feeling with your body consciousness. But of course, cognizing those two doesn't happen simultaneously. You just experience them simultaneously. That's an important question. Yes. Tuval, is this question still? Do you still have a question? Can you pass on the microphone to Tuval?
That's embarrassing. I will try.
Okay.
So my question kind of follows what you were asking, but I was thinking about what you were saying about the moment when we have aversion for the person, we can only see the negative aspects of the person, or we can superimpose. So let's say...
I'll repeat the question, just in case it's not...
when that is not the case, I will try to understand how we perceive an object, let's say a person, because there's so many things that you can see in a person. Thinking of my mother, there's mother, wife, teacher, or grandmother, and you can actually feel how I can see here in these different aspects. And on top of that, we also have all that we were discussing, the function, the parts. So all of these things, when I perceive a person, like what I perceive, there's so many things that I can see in this person.
Alright, so his question with regard to anger, superimposing negative qualities, exaggerating negative qualities. So how about like looking at your own mother, for instance? There's so many aspects to this person. Your own mother being a woman, being a daughter, being a wife, being your mother, and so many activities, so functions she performs or activities she engages in. What are we perceiving? I don't know. Sometimes our mind focuses on the activities. Sometimes it focuses on the fact she's a woman. Sometimes, I think it just depends. Our mind is so rapid, is so quick, that within a few seconds, you can take all sorts of different aspects of your mother into consideration. You may feel grateful to some aspect, be angry about other aspects, etc. So different emotional responses. And we haven't even addressed, and I think you've mentioned it, how about minds that are, the term that is used in modern psychology would be subconscious. As in like, we're not even really fully aware that those awarenesses are present. And nonetheless they're there, and they influence us, and sometimes we don't even know how certain gross or coarser thoughts arise, unless we had subtler awarenesses that gave rise to them. So of course that very much complicates our perception of things. And in the end, I don't know it. There's so much possible within just a minute. The mind is so rapid, it's so fast that you can go from subtler types of awareness to coarser ones. With regard to your mother, you can take to mind all sorts of aspects, imaginary ones that have a basis in reality. Anything. I mean, the mind is so sophisticated. It can do so much. And we're so little aware of many of the aspects that it does. We're so involved in the objects that we're not aware of what the mind itself does. But again, it is through mindfulness of the mind, not just in meditation. Because mindfulness of the mind in meditation is pretty artificial. You're only training yourself to, in that mental factor, to then use it throughout the day. So what you start doing is look inwards. Every now and then look inwards. What was that train of thought? I like that I like that expression, a train of thought, like a long train that moves very quickly. And each one of those thoughts is different from the other. So to check, in what moment when you think of your mother, what were all these trains, what were all these different moments, and what were the different aspects of your mother that your mind perceived? Anything, it can be anything.
Any given moment you think you can have only one feeling and one perception of certain objects?
Well, with regard to a mental consciousness, yes. At any point in time, and there's only one object, like a conceptual mind, but since it races back and forth so quickly, you may feel you're doing all that simultaneously, right? Look at, for instance, like a movie with different picture frames, because it moves so fast. You may even think something happens simultaneously, whereas actually it takes place, they're different frames. So your conceptual mind is like a movie frame, a frame at a time, and depending on how quickly these frames change, you may think you're taking to mind different objects. Does that help? Think of it like a movie frame. Okay, can we pass the microphone to the back? What's your name?
Kartike.
Pardon?
Kartike.
Kartike. Okay, Kartike.
So, just trying to figure out another example.
Yes.
Where two emotions can occur simultaneously. So, how about anger and pride?
I don't think anger and pride can arise simultaneously, because it's both a mental consciousness. But it switches back and forth very quickly, right? There's a sense of me. This person hurt me. I'm angry. How dare they? I'm angry. How dare they? I'm angry. Like back and forth so quickly that it feels like you're doing it simultaneously, but you can't, because your mental consciousness can at a time only either this or that. So it's back and forth. It's the old discussion, or the discussion we've had with the sandwich and the massage, etc. It seems to happen simultaneously. We don't even miss out on the movie, because the conversation and the pictures in the movie are too slow for us to miss out on something. It is our mind moves much faster, so we don't actually miss anything. Unless we're really distracted for like a few seconds, then we miss out on things. But other than that, that very quick is possible with the mind. Yeah. Okay, Nikita, you're right next to him.
It's just a clarification regarding the feelings. So feelings are one of the mental factors.
Yes.
And they arise with every conscious.
With every consciousness.
Conceptual mind and
sense consciousness.
Sense consciousness. From reading the other mental factors, I just felt like a lot of them are subsets of feelings, like anger, love, hatred.
Results of anger. So they arise as a result of feeling. As a result of certain feelings, then we may feel attachment, we may feel anger, etc. So what you discovered, or what you noticed, was their interconnectedness. But it's not really a subset as such. It's not saying that the anger is a feeling. With every anger, with every anger is one mental factor that comes with a main mind and a certain feeling. So anger can never arise without another mental factor of feeling. But that doesn't make those two being the same thing. Right?
So, but you said that with every mind, there's only one mental factor that arises.
No, with every mind, you have at least 5 mental factors.
Which are the omnipresent ones.
Which are the omnipresent one, and then you can have more than those 5. At least 5. And then 6, 7, 8, etc. I don't know of the 51 I said to Tim before. Of the 51, I'm not really sure. Of the 51, I'm not really sure how many of the 51 can at the most arise together. Does that make sense?
So it's like a feeling which is either neutral, positive, or negative.
Yes.
And then
pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
And then directly associated with that is hatred, anger.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. That's it.
Usually, one of the other mental factors will most of the times always arise with the feeling, unless it's neutral.
Neutral feeling is still a feeling.
Right, but none of the other mental factors like hatred, anger, whatever it is, they won't arise with it unless it's positive or negative.
No. Oh, right. Oh, your question is the feeling that is associated with anger always Pleasant or unpleasant?
No.
Can it also be neutral? Is that your question?
No. It's like if I have a feeling of positivity, there will be virtuous mental factors that will arise with it. Okay. If I have a feeling of negativity, some of the negative mental
Not necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily. You can have, like, attachment can arise together with a feeling of pleasure. Attachment. So that's actually an afflictive emotion. It can be negative, and still there can be a sense of pleasure there. Anger is usually associated with displeasure, but who knows, when you're really angry and you finally get to hit the other person, there may be a sense of pleasure, like this release, like if you suppress the anger anyway. Right? Even in that moment you feel anger and you feel like, yes, right? Like when another person beats up the person you don't like and you're just watching there and you don't like the person, you're so happy they're getting beaten up. I think that would be a case of where you can have a pleasant feeling. It's not a good pleasant feeling. I mean, it's not a virtuous pleasant feeling, of course, but it's still a pleasant feeling.
So it's not necessarily that with this idea of feeling, there is another mental factor that arises. So if it's neutral, there's no other associated mental factor that would arise with it.
What do you mean with no other? There's at least 4 others.
No. Not the omnipresent.
Besides those.
Besides those.
It doesn't have to be no. It doesn't have to be. But there usually when it's anger, there are these other non-virtuous ones that usually rise together with that. When it's virtuous, they say also the other ones, the function becomes active in that moment. But we'll discuss this further. We haven't really gotten to that yet. Can you pass the microphone to her? To you, not the window.
I don't think I need it now.
You didn't raise your hand?
I did, but I don't think I need the microphone now.
Ah, okay, that's true. All right. Yes.
So I was wondering what kind of sense consciousness, or is it mental consciousness, which is actually when we are in a crowd,
yes,
and suddenly we know that someone's looking at us, and our eyes, like, is it mental consciousness first or sense consciousness? But the eye engages later. So the
interesting. So you're facing that way, and you know someone is watching you. Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting question. So, can it be an eye consciousness? No, because your sense power is not in the sphere of vision. Can it be a nose consciousness? It's the smell of observation. It probably isn't that either, right?
Can it be a mental consciousness?
Can it be a mental consciousness?
A direct yogic perceiver.
Whoa, that yogic perceiver. I don't think it's a yogic perceiver because that's the result of meditation. That's a direct result of the union of karma, abiding, and special insight. No, but yes, I know. I think it is probably clairvoyance. That's such a weird word, right? But we sometimes know things. We had other examples. I'm trying to remember now, like intuitions or whatever we call those. I believe, and they could be conceptual. I don't know, but I believe we have those, and they're mental. It's just the mind's ability to know. We may pick up even on on another person's emotional state, and nothing in their face, right? Nothing in their face indicates that. I mean, sometimes twins.
But it's not even like you know somebody. Like it's just in a group of random people. Also.
I know. That's what I mean. Like, I don't mean you need to know that person. You could know that person. You have a strong karmic connection with the twin, for instance, or a mother to a child. But even with that if there's some really intense, because someone who watches you, they usually don't just innocently kind of go, no, very intense. So maybe that intense thought, you can pick up on that. I mean, there are a lot of stories of the lamas, not just stories, but incidents where the lamas have developed clairvoyance of our thoughts, knowing what we think. That sounds scary, but if they have great compassion, it's pretty much safe with that. So, no, the point is that you can actually generate what is called clairvoyance of another person's mind, when you always know another person's mind. That is the state where you can just focus on another person and you know. But without some basis there, we wouldn't be able to do it. So we all have that potential to know another person's mind, and in some cases you do. I don't have that. I never had that. I don't know what people are talking about. The feeling of knowing you're being watched. Sometimes I believe someone watches me and they don't, and sometimes they watch me and I don't know. So it's like, in my case, I just don't have that. But some people do, and I believe they do. Does that make sense?
Could it be paranoia?
Could it be paranoia? It can also be. That's our problem. When is it paranoia? When is it real intuition? To distinguish between those two, that's a problem. That's a challenge.
Couldn't it be inferential? Inferential, you've been watched before, so you think people are watching you.
But that's not a correct reason. Just because someone watched me before, how can you infer from someone watching you before? Not every reason is a correct reason.
Oh, there is an inattentive attention. Like sometimes you just pass by fast and you...
Right, sometimes you just notice without... Sometimes it's a subconscious mind. You go past and it doesn't really... You're not aware that your eye consciousness has actually picked up this like... guy looking at you, right? And that's how you know. That could also be the case. But sometimes that's not necessary. That's not necessary.
I
Right?
had that many times. If I may add, there's no preceding condition.
Yes.
Right? So it's just like
You just know.
spontaneous and
Yeah,
very-
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like I said, we have the ability, our mind has the ability to know. Mind has the ability to know, and that is expressed in that moment. Oswald? No, forgot your name. What's your name again? What's your name again?
Everyone, it's Ed.
Ed, sorry. Yeah, Ed, go ahead.
Everyone sits on the scale of like psychopath to like very, very empathetic, and people who are highly mindful would be able to capitalise on that, right? They'd be able to read your expressions better than you can.
I agree.
And they'd see the situation and they would understand how you would respond because of exactly who you are. So I feel like even on a material basis, someone who's practiced these kind of exercises would be able to really understand you.
Yes, I agree that the mind has the ability to know, and you can train that in different ways. So you can pick up, like a Tibetan doctor can pick up on the energy in your body, and like you described, like different techniques, even though they're not meditational, and we can know. I agree with that on that. Yeah, definitely.
But also,
Just in concern to just a sec, yeah.
Yeah, to this, there are times like what happens when we see intuitively, you turn around and you see somebody, and like you feel somebody staring at you. You turn around and you see, you have light on there. But there will be so many times when you don't feel that somebody is staring at you.
Yeah.
So how do you know? I mean, you don't know how many times people have been staring at you.
Right.
It's except the 2 times that you actually made eye contact.
Is it coincidence or did I? Yeah.
No, it's just like a
random thing. Yes. Okay. But some people say some people they have the experience that it's always proves right. In my case, it's not the case. So let's say there are these people that have that. I mean, I cannot deny that this is possible. So in that case, how do we know? It's just that ability of the mind. I don't know, maybe we pick up on the energy of that person, right?
Yes. It's like the energy. Hearing mind, because maybe like there were steps and they stopped, and it was like an awareness that wasn't a certain.
Right. It could also be that.
Or there was maybe a wind or some sound that gets blocked because the person is there.
What it?
Think about it.
Room full of crowd.
Yeah, so there'll be more noise somewhere else, but there's just not. There's like a spot where there's not that movement, right? And maybe it's just enough that you're sensitive enough to pick up on
Another
that.
similar example would be when 2 people are talking and you get a sense that they're talking about me. Sometimes it is right, sometimes it's wrong.
That's a good example. Like sometimes we're so self-obsessed, we think everyone is talking about us, right? Yeah. But sometimes they do, right? They suddenly go quiet when you stop talking. How much clearer
It
could
could
it
also be shame. You've done something. You're
be? We could, yeah. Coming back to shame. Okay. Yes.
Different topic.
Okay.
Coming from the discussion group.
Yes.
So if my focal object is emptiness,
yes.
Conceptual emptiness.
Yes.
Does it have any attributes?
Does emptiness have any attributes? Does emptiness have any...
The conceptual emptiness.
No. But the conceptual mind, the emptiness it perceives as emptiness. There's not like the emptiness of the conceptual mind and the emptiness of a direct mind. It is emptiness, right? Yeah. So does emptiness have attributes? You don't have to ask whether the emptiness that appears to the conceptual mind has attributes, because the same emptiness eventually appears to a direct mind. So does emptiness have characteristics, parts?
Yes.
Dependence.
It's
depends on something?
Object that you're trying to find.
Pardon?
It's the absence of that object which you're trying to call it as.
Desi, what are you saying?
It's empty of being objectively existent. Emptiness.
Oh, so she's saying it is empty of existing objectively. What did you say?
I said it's the absence of the object you're trying to call empty. Negation.
So it's a negative. It has the aspect of being a negative. So it has the attribute of being appearing to the mind as something negative, not as a positive object. It has that attribute. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Bao? Oh, so you okay? Is the question because I only had I thought you wanted to contribute to that. So is this clear that it has attributes? It is dependent on a basis. Emptiness of the table is dependent on a basis that is the table in this case. So it has the attribute of depending on an object, on a phenomenon. Okay, so we have 3 examples. Does that? Yeah. Okay.
What about emptiness of emptiness?
Yeah. Emptiness of emptiness. Okay. What about the emptiness of emptiness? Does that depend on something?
Yes.
Does that have attributes? Yes, it depends on emptiness. No. The emptiness of the emptiness, the basis is not the same as the aspect emptiness here. The emptiness of the emptiness, when we say the emptiness of emptiness, right? Let's take the first emptiness is the emptiness of the table. The emptiness of the table, that also lacks inherent existence. So, the emptiness of the emptiness here, the second emptiness of emptiness, that emptiness, its basis is the emptiness of the table. In the case of the first emptiness, its basis is the table. So it has a different basis, based on which you come to the conclusion that the object doesn't exist inherently. Right? Emptiness is not something floating in the air, like emptiness of emptiness of emptiness. It's like the emptiness of a table, that also lacks inherent existence. So it is the emptiness of the table.
So it will be direct perception because if not infinite regression, because we can continue.
Infinite regression is not a problem. Infinity? The emptiness of it goes on endlessly. There's an infinite regress. And we may not conceptually perceive that. Directly you can. But, infinitivity always have. Right? You have the cause of 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 the cause. The result of the result of the result of the result. That is infinity. The emptiness of the emptiness of the emptiness. It goes infinitely.
Yes.
There's no problem. But you can't realize each of those emptinesses with a conceptual mind.
To clarify, so is there a state of a pure state of emptiness that is, for example, the I? If you realize the emptiness of your inherent existence, then
your lack of inherent existence.
Yes, and at that point, even when you perceive, like if you realize this emptiness, then you can't see any object anymore. So you're kind of perceiving reality as empty, right? Is it like the ultimate state of emptiness? There must be a state of emptiness.
Well, if you realize the emptiness of the table, in that moment, with that conceptual mind, only the emptiness appears and nothing else. No other conventional truth that is not connected to that table appears. The table cannot appear.
Yes.
The meaning generality of the emptiness, that appears. That's a conventional truth. But other than that, nothing can appear to that mind. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. No conventional truth.
What about your inherent existence?
Okay, this question is really like going into, it's again one of those questions, unless I start talking more about emptiness, I cannot fully answer it. The same is true for your own emptiness of inherent existence. You don't appear to that mind when your inherent existence appears, because you disappear, right? For our mind, it's either phenomena exist inherently or they don't exist at all. So unless we've really found the middle way, that's really only a Buddha can find that, then you cannot have a single mind to which the object appears plus the emptiness, right? The object that is a conventional truth. Does that make sense? But I'm sorry, this goes a little bit too much and we don't have the time. I would love to go into it, but that would be like add another 10 days or do a course on emptiness. Bao, so you started with a question.
A potential point against the thesis of emptiness.
Uh-huh.
I don't buy it, but I would like to get your thoughts.
You don't buy it?
I don't buy this argument, but
he doesn't believe in it.
He doesn't believe it.
I don't buy it. Yes, I don't subscribe. Okay, I
get your thoughts on it. we say that the parts of these objects do not inherently exist, and therefore this object as a whole does not inherently exist. Right?
Yes, that would work.
Two of the most successful theories in science tell us that the reality is one unbroken whole, not analyzable in parts.
Wait, the reality is one unbroken whole, not analyzable in parts.
Yeah. And
who says that?
Two theories. One is general theory of relativity, and also, of course, quantum mechanics. So this tendency, this biological predisposition that we have towards seeing reality in terms of fragments or parts has biological origins, has evolutionary basis, has survival or adaptive significance.
Okay, so those are the causes. Okay.
Yeah. That is how we have evolved. That is how we make sense of the world. If you look at the world in and of itself, it is one unbroken whole. That is what
it's one unbroken whole. What does that even mean? It's an unbroken whole. I never said it was a broken whole. Right? Like, I mean, saying it's a whole, that's one part. But where does the broken and the unbroken come in?
We break reality into fragments, into parts. This is what...
Okay, that's conceptually breaking it up, which actually you can't break it up physically. I agree with that. I don't think the Buddhists just say you can conceptually break it up. They don't say you can literally break up a person like nose over here and then they still expect and heart over there and still expect the person to exist. We're just breaking it up conceptually, not physically. So an unbroken whole, it depends on, are you saying physically breaking it up or mentally? We're talking about conceptually breaking it up. Does that make sense? So just to make sure we're talking about the same thing here. Right? So when they say it's an unbroken whole, are they saying you cannot mentally break it up, or are they saying you cannot physically break it up? There's a difference.
Both, I think. Both physically as well as mentally.
Mentally you cannot take it apart? You cannot think of things separately? They wouldn't accept that? Because you can do it from your own experience. You can do it, right? We do it all the time.
No, but that is not how reality is. It only...
No, is means like, of course it cannot in actuality be broken up. But when you say it cannot be in actuality broken up, it's here. What I hear is it cannot physically be broken up. But I'm saying Buddhists don't say that. They just say certain things like you can only mentally break up. I cannot break up the emptiness of a table and the table. They're inseparably linked. But I can take them to mind separately. You see what I mean? So I think the Buddhists would agree with your statement, but it needs to be defined, right? To make sure what I'm saying is right.
And then just one more small thing. Like quantum mechanics also seems to suggest that, some people have made this argument that in this theory, an entity can be both cause as well as, its own cause as well as effect. Not all physicists buy into it, but there are some people who talk in this direction.
Okay, very good. From a Buddhist point of view, an object is, whatever is a cause is also a result. Whatever is a cause is also whatever is a cause is a result. Whatever is a result is a cause. Okay? But it can never be a cause of X and a result of X. Never. In the same way, this cannot be long in relation to X and short in relation to X. It can only be short in relation to one thing and long in relation to something else. A cause, this is a cause. Or let's take the sprout. A sprout is a cause of what happens afterwards. It is a result of its seed. Okay, it's a cause of the plant that it grows into. It is a result of what preceded it. So it's in relation to a seed, it's a cause, it's a result. In relation to the plant, it is a cause. Now, it cannot be the cause of itself from a Buddhist point of view, but only in relation to how do you define a cause. Again, if they say it's a cause of itself, pretty much a cause is defined separately. So the word, you can use it in any way you want. But what is a cause in Buddhism? It is something that precedes the object, right? Gives rise to the object, and the moment the object is there, it goes out of existence. So if that's how you define a cause, right, then They cannot exist at the same time. So nothing can be the cause of itself, because that would mean it doesn't exist at the same time as itself. So that would be catch-22 kind of thing, right? It is its cause, and it exists at that time. But since it's a cause, it cannot exist at the time as itself. So that's a contradiction there. It cannot be that. Now, when they talk about cause of itself, I need to know, how do they define a cause? If they define it the Buddhist way, I don't think they could say that, because it's by definition it must have preceded. It couldn't be the thing that it creates, because it doesn't exist at the time, right? So again, so important before we can compare those two. Very important to find out, how do they define a cause, right? Yeah. So that would be my suggestion to do that. Okay, 6 minutes after 6. Sorry, there were some other questions. What's your name? What's your name?
Lazaro.
Oh, it's not again. I've never heard that name. Say again?
Lazaro.
Lazaro. Like Lazaro? Like the Bible, Lazaro?
Yeah.
Oh, Lazaro. Okay, great. So Lazaro will be the first one to ask the question tomorrow. Okay, great. Thank you. Have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow. Please keep the silence. Very important, because the other group started now their 2-day retreat. So it's even more important to keep the silence. And I'll read those questions. I'll take them home.